The hum of the Rolls-Royce engines on the Aurajet A350 promised a tranquil 8-hour journey from New York to Paris. In the hushed exclusive enclave of business class, every passenger was a portrait of success, except in the eyes of some for the woman in seat 2A. Dressed in a simple charcoal tracksuit, she seemed out of place. A quiet judgment rippled through the cabin, culminating in a flight attendant's condescending smile and a question that hung in the air like a guillotine. "Ma'am, are you certain this is your seat?" They saw a mistake. They saw someone who didn't belong. What they couldn't see was that the woman they were about to humiliate held the fate of their entire airline in the palm of her hand. The air in Aurajet's Polaris business class cabin was a carefully curated symphony of privilege. The scent was a custom blend of white tea and fig. The lighting was a soft, ambient glow mimicking a gentle sunset, and the murmur of conversation was low and self-assured. It was a world away from the controlled chaos of JFK's Terminal 4, a sanctuary for which its occupants paid a premium. Dr. Serene Whitaker settled into seat 2A, a window seat with a coveted aisle access. She stretched her long legs, the soft, high-grade cotton of her tracksuit, a welcome comfort after a grueling 72-hour sprint closing a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. For her, this flight wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, a sliver of time to decompress her mind before landing in Paris for a keynote speech at the World Climate Technology Summit. Her attire was a deliberate choice, anonymous, comfortable, and practical. Her natural hair was styled in intricate cornrows, a crown of artistry that needed no announcement. She wore no makeup, and her only jewelry was a simple, unadorned platinum band on her right hand, a gift to herself after her first company went public. She was invisible, and she preferred it that way. The problem with invisibility, however, is that it invites people to fill in the blanks with their own prejudices. The first ripple of discord came from seat 3C across the aisle. His name was Brent Holloway, a man whose personality seemed to be tailored from the same loud pinstriped cloth as his suit. He was a senior vice president of sales for a mid-level software firm, a fact he had made sure the entire front cabin knew through a series of booming phone calls before the cabin door was sealed. He had the kind of florid, overconfident face that came from years of expense account lunches and an unshakable belief in his own importance. He glanced at Serene, then did a conspicuous double-take. He leaned over to his traveling companion in 3D, a younger, sycophantic colleague named Kevin, and muttered loud enough for Serene to hear, "Must be a diversity hire a bit out of her depth. Probably cashed in every last frequent flyer mile her company has." Kevin snickered a high-pitched, nervous sound. Or maybe she won a radio contest. Serene's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd heard variations of this theme her entire life. The surprise that she was in the advanced physics class. The shock that she was the lead engineer on the project. The disbelief that she was the founder and CEO. She had built an empire on the low expectations of men like Brent Holloway. She took a slow, calming breath, letting the insult wash over her without latching on. She placed her noise-cancelling headphones over her ears, but didn't turn them on yet. Observation was a powerful tool. The boarding process continued. A flight attendant named Dahlia Miller moved through the cabin with a practiced, brittle smile. She was a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun and a gaze that seemed to perpetually scan for imperfections. She offered pre-departure champagne to Brent, addressing him as Mr. Holloway with a familiar reverence. He was a Platinum Medallion member, and she knew her regulars. She offered a glass to Kevin. She offered one to the woman in 2C. She walked right past Serene. It wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate omission, a non-verbal cue that said, "You are not one of us." Serene waited a full minute. When Dahlia passed by again, Serene politely lowered her headphones. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm and even. "Could I have a glass of water, please?" Dahlia stopped, her smile tightening. "Of course." She turned away, her movements clipped. She returned not with the elegant crystal flute the others had received their champagne in, but with a plastic cup of water from the economy galley. She placed it on the console with a soft thud that felt louder than it was. "There you are," she said, her tone dripping with saccharine condescension. The man in Tusia, a quiet hedge fund manager who had witnessed the exchange, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He knew what was happening. He chose to stare intently at the safety card. Serene looked at the plastic cup. She looked at the crystal flutes surrounding her. She looked back at Dahlia. "Thank you," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. But inside, a switch had been flipped. This was no longer just a flight. It was a case study. The final insult, the one that sealed their fates, came just before takeoff. Dahlia was doing her final cabin check. She paused at Serene's seat. "Ma'am," she began, that brittle smile firmly in place. "I just need to verify your seat assignment one more time. We've had some mix-ups today." This was it. The ultimate humiliation delivered under the guise of procedure. Brent Holloway smirked openly, leaning forward slightly to watch the show. Serene didn't move. She didn't reach for her bag or her phone. She simply met Dahlia's gaze. "My seat assignment is 2A. My boarding pass was scanned at the gate checked by the agent at the jet bridge and is clearly displayed on the screen above my seat. Is there a specific reason you feel the need to verify it a third time?" Her directness threw Dahlia off balance. The flight attendant's smile faltered. "It's just standard procedure for randomly selected passengers." It was a weak, transparent lie. I see Serene said the two words carrying a weight that Dahlia couldn't possibly comprehend. "Well, I can assure you I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Dahlia flustered, and now slightly angry at being challenged, huffed. "Fine." She spun on her heel and marched toward the galley, her composure cracked. Brent Holloway let out a low chuckle. "Someone's touchy," he said to Kevin, who nodded eagerly in agreement. Serene turned her head to look out the window. The ground crew was pulling away the jet bridge. The lights of New York glittered, a sprawling galaxy of ambition and indifference. She felt a familiar coldness settle in her chest, the detached calm she always felt before a hostile takeover. They thought they were laughing at a misplaced woman in a tracksuit. They had no idea they were mocking Dr. Serene Whitaker, the founder and managing partner of Phoenix Vanguard Capital. The private equity firm that had just 6 weeks prior completed a quiet but controlling acquisition of 28% of Aurajet Airlines, making her the single largest and most powerful investor on their board. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the owner, and she had just begun her audit. She picked up her phone, which was still connected to the airport Wi-Fi. She typed a short, simple email to her chief of staff. Subject: Aurajet, Flight AJ112, JFK CDG, body flag flight attendant Dahlia Miller, and purser on this flight for immediate review. Also get me a full profile on passenger Brent Holloway, seat 3C. He is a Platinum Medallion member. I want to know everything about him, his company, and any contracts his company holds with any of our portfolio businesses. We have a culture problem." She hit send just as the plane began its powerful pushback from the gate. The journey had just begun, but for Dahlia Miller and Brent Holloway, it was already over. They just didn't know it yet. As the Airbus A350 sliced through the night sky, a temporary false peace settled over the business-class cabin. The dinner service began an elaborate ritual of starched linen, polished silverware, and multi-course meals designed by a celebrity chef. Dahlia Miller, having recovered her professional veneer, served the cabin with practiced efficiency. She lavished attention on Brent Holloway, laughing at his unfunny jokes, refilling his wine glass before it was even empty. She treated him like visiting royalty. When she arrived at Serene's seat, her demeanor shifted. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a cold, robotic correctness. "Your choice for the main course?" she asked, without making eye contact. "I'll have the seared halibut, Serene," replied, her tone neutral. "And to drink still water is fine, thank you." The meal was delivered, silently placed on her tray table, with minimal interaction. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, communicating disdain through the absence of courtesy. While Brent was offered a cheese-course dessert wine and extra chocolates, Serene's tray was cleared away the moment she set down her fork without any such offers. Serene wasn't offended. She was cataloguing. Each slight, each disparity in service was a data point. In her world, data was power. It formed patterns, exposed weaknesses, and built cases that were impossible to refute. Her mind, trained to deconstruct complex chemical engineering problems, was now deconstructing the systemic failures of Aurajet's premium service model. The problem wasn't just Dahlia. Dahlia was a symptom. The disease was a culture that allowed her prejudice to fester unchecked. Across the aisle, Brent Holloway was growing louder, fueled by free-flowing Bordeaux and his own ego. He had his laptop open and was engaged in a video call, forgoing headphones entirely. "Look, Peterson." It's simple. He boomed, his voice cutting through the cabin's hush. "We strong-arm them on the pricing. Tell them if they don't accept a 15% cut, we walk. We're Syntec Solutions, for God's sake. They need us more than we need them." He was a caricature of corporate machismo. Serene made a mental note. Syntec Solutions. Her team would already be digging into them. An hour into the flight, the chief purser, a man named David, emerged from the forward galley. David was older than Dahlia, with a kind, weary face. He had been with the airline for over 30 years and had seen it all. He was making his rounds, checking on the passengers, when a small chime sounded on the tablet he carried, the crew's internal communication device. He glanced down at the screen. A priority message had just come in from the Aurajet Global Operations Center in Atlanta. It was flagged with a color he'd only seen a handful of times in his long career: magenta. Magenta meant board-level importance. The message was brief: ATTN Purser Flight, AJ Wast 12. Urgent. Confirm a passenger in seat 2A is Dr. Serene Whitaker. Extend every possible courtesy. She is a VVIP-1 Alpha. Acknowledge immediately. CEO Robert Maxwell is monitoring. David's blood ran cold. VVIP-1 Alpha was a designation so high it was almost mythical. It wasn't for celebrities or politicians. It was for the people who owned the airline. He looked at the passenger manifest on his tablet. Seat 2A, Whitaker, Serene. He looked over at the woman in the charcoal tracksuit, who was now reading a dense report on a tablet of her own, the screen filled with charts and financial projections. His heart pounded in his chest. He suddenly replayed the entire boarding process in his mind. He'd been busy in the galley, but he'd heard the tone in Dahlia's voice. He'd seen her deliver the plastic cup. He felt a wave of nausea. This was a catastrophe. He walked over to Dahlia, who was wiping down a counter in the galley. "Dahlia," he said, his voice low and tight. "What was your interaction with the passenger in 2A? Dahlia scoffed. "Oh, her acted like she owned the place. I had to put her in her lane a bit. Some people get a free upgrade and think they can—" "Dahlia, shut up." David hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "Just shut up." He showed her the message on his tablet. Dahlia's face went white. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of horror. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide. VVIP. Alpha. She whispered the words, barely audible. But she's what Dahlia David snapped. Not dressed to your standards. The CEO is monitoring this flight. Monitoring. Do you have any idea what that means? Dahlia looked like she was going to be sick. The brittle confidence she had worn like armor was shattered, revealing the terrified, small-minded person beneath. David, I didn't know. How could I have known? That's the point, he whispered furiously. Our job is to treat everyone with respect. Because you never know. What did you do? I saw the plastic cup. What else did you do? Dahlia could only shake her head, speechless with panic. David took a deep breath, trying to regain control. This was his flight, his responsibility. He had to attempt to salvage the situation. He straightened his tie, smoothed his uniform, and walked out of the galley toward seat 2A, his steps feeling heavy as lead. He approached Serene with a look of profound humility. "Dr. Whittaker," he said, his voice soft and respectful. Serene looked up from her tablet, her expression unreadable. "Yes, I am David Martin, the purser for this flight. I wanted to personally apologize if your experience thus far has been anything less than exceptional. Please, is there anything at all I can get for you? A drink from our premium cellar? Perhaps a cheese plate?" His sudden fawning attention was not lost on the other passengers. Brent Holloway watched a flicker of confusion on his face. He'd assumed the woman was a nobody. Why was the purser suddenly treating her like the Queen of England? Serene offered a small, cool smile. "No, thank you, David." "I'm quite all right. Are you certain Dr. David pressed desperate to make amends? I can have a proper glass brought for your water right away." "That won't be necessary," she said, her gaze flicking for a brief moment to the offending plastic cup. "But I do appreciate the offer." Her tone was polite, but it was also dismissive. It was the tone of a superior ending a conversation. There would be no easy absolution here. David retreated, his heart sinking. He knew it was too late. The damage was done. He spent the rest of the flight in a state of quiet dread, shooting fearful glances at Dahlia, who now moved through the cabin like a ghost, her face pale and her hands shaking. Serene, meanwhile, finished her report, dimmed her screen, and put her headphones on. This time, she turned them on. The world-class noise-cancelling technology enveloped her in a cocoon of perfect silence. She closed her eyes. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger was an inefficient emotion. What she felt now was a cold, clear sense of purpose. The landing in Paris was smooth. As the plane taxied to the gate at Charles de Gaulle, the flight attendants prepared for disembarking. The usual scrum of business-class passengers stood up, eager to be the first off. The seatbelt sign pinged off. But before anyone could move, the captain's voice came over the intercom, crisp and unusually formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just arrived at the gate. For security reasons, we ask that all passengers please remain seated until our ground staff have boarded the aircraft." "Thank you." A murmur of confusion went through the cabin. This was not standard procedure. Brent Holloway huffed impatiently. What now? Did they lose a piece of luggage? 2 minutes later, the cabin door opened, but it wasn't the ground crew who entered. It was 3 people in dark, tailored suits. One was the Aerojet Paris station manager, a man named Jean-Luc Moreau. He looked pale and stressed. Beside him was a younger woman holding a tablet and an earpiece, and leading them was a tall, imposing man Serene recognized immediately, Gerard Dupuy, the head of European operations for Aerojet and a fellow board member. They walked directly to seat 2A. They completely ignored Brent Holloway, who was standing in the aisle expecting to be greeted. They ignored everyone else. Their focus was solely on Serene. Gerard Dupuy stopped before her, bowing his head slightly. "Dr. Whittaker," he said, his voice a mixture of deference and deep concern. "Welcome to Paris. I came to personally escort you off the aircraft. We have a car waiting on the tarmac." Serene slowly, deliberately removed her headphones. She stood up. The entire business class cabin was now silent, watching this bizarre scene unfold. Brent Holloway's jaw was slack. He couldn't process what he was seeing. Dahlia Miller, standing frozen in the galley doorway, looked as if she had seen a ghost. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her with the force of a tidal wave. Jean-Luc Moreau, the station manager, spoke into his wrist. "The asset is secure." He then looked at Serene. "Dr. Whitaker, Mr. Maxwell is on the line for you from Atlanta. He insisted on speaking with you the moment you landed." He held out a sleek satellite phone. Serene took the phone. She held it to her ear, her gaze sweeping over the cabin landing for a moment on Brent, and then for a moment longer on Dahlia. "Robert," she said into the phone, her voice calm and authoritative. "Yes, I've landed." The flight, it was illuminating. Regarding the quarterly review of the transatlantic fleet's customer service protocols, "I've just completed my preliminary field audit. We have a lot to discuss." She listened for a moment, then said, "Yes, Gerard is here. I'll see you at the board meeting on Tuesday. Be prepared." She handed the phone back to the manager. She picked up her single, understated leather carry-on bag. Without a backward glance at the cabin or its stunned occupants, she was escorted off the plane by the executives, disappearing down the jet bridge toward a private world of power and consequence that the others could barely imagine. In the silence she left behind, Brent Holloway slowly sank back into his seat. The smirk was gone, replaced by a dawning, sickening understanding. He hadn't just insulted a fellow passenger. He had insulted the person who held the strings, and he had a terrible feeling she was about to start pulling them. 1 week later, the view from the 54th floor boardroom of Aurajet's corporate headquarters in Atlanta was breathtaking. The city sprawled below, a testament to commerce and ambition. But inside the room, the atmosphere was suffocating. The immense mahogany table, polished to a mirror, shine reflected the grim faces of the men and women seated around it. This was the heart of the empire, and it was a heart filled with fear. At the head of the table sat Robert Maxwell, the CEO of Aurajet. A man known for his booming confidence and slick presentations today, he looked diminished. His expensive suit seemed to hang off him, and a fine sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, despite the powerful air conditioning. To his left sat Gérard Dupuy, the head of European operations, looking just as grim. Other vice presidents and board members lined the table, their expressions ranging from anxious to funereal. The seat of honor to Robert's right was occupied by Dr. Serene Whitaker. If her appearance on the plane was designed for anonymity, her appearance today was designed for absolute power. She wore a bespoke sapphire blue suit that was both severe and elegant. Her hair was styled immaculately. Her gaze was sharp, analytical, and utterly uncompromising. She was no longer a case study. She was the judge, jury, and executioner. Before her lay a single, slim folder. "Good morning, Robert," began, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We are here today to address a serious customer service failure that occurred on flight AJ-112 last week, an incident that Dr. Whitaker was gracious enough to bring to our attention personally. He used the word gracious as if it were a shield." Serene let the silence hang in the air for a moment after he finished. Then she spoke, her voice, not loud, but carrying a chilling precision that cut through the tension. "Let's dispense with the euphemisms, Robert," she said, her eyes fixed on the CEO. "This wasn't a customer service failure. It was a symptom of a deep, systemic, cultural rot. A rot that fosters an environment where employees feel empowered to engage in overt discrimination based on their own personal biases. It's a rot that suggests our premium brand promise, excellence in air, is nothing more than a hollow marketing slogan. She opened the folder. My investment group Phoenix Vanguard Capital poured $800 million into Aurajet for a 28% stake, making us the lead investor. She continued, her voice level. That investment was not an act of charity. It was predicated on Aurajet's potential for growth, its brand reputation, and its operational integrity. What I experienced was not operational integrity. It was a liability. She slid a single piece of paper across the polished table to Robert. It was a photograph, a high-resolution image of the plastic water cup sitting forlornly on the business-class console next to a crystal champagne flute. This, she said, is a multi-million-dollar problem in a 3-cent cup. It represents the gap between the brand we sell and the product we deliver. Robert Maxwell paled, staring at the photo as if it were a venomous snake. I believe you've concluded your internal investigation, Serene stated not as a question, but as a command for a report. Robert nodded, shuffling his papers. Yes, Dr. Whitaker. We have. The flight attendant, Dahlia Miller, has been with us for 19 years. Her file contained several prior complaints of rudeness, though none were ever formally escalated to this level. How many prior complaints? Robert Serene asked, her gaze unwavering. 7, he mumbled. Over 19 years. 7 that were reported, she corrected him. 7 passengers who had the energy and the will to navigate your deliberately obtuse complaints process. For every one of them, how many hundreds simply decided never to fly Aurajet again? How much revenue has this one employee cost us over 2 decades because her supervisors couldn't be bothered to manage her properly? No one had an answer. The question was a dagger. She has been placed on administrative leave pending termination, Robert added quickly. We are treating this with the utmost seriousness. Termination is a consequence, not a solution, Serene countered. It's pruning a single dead branch from a diseased tree. We need to treat the disease. She paused, then shifted her focus. Which brings me to the second subject of my field audit, Mr. Brent Holloway. She slid another paper across the table. It was a detailed profile. Brent Holloway, she announced to the room. Senior Vice President of Sales Syntech Solutions. An Aurajet Platinum Medallion flyer for 6 consecutive years, spending an average of $70,000 annually with this airline. He is exactly the kind of customer we claim to covet. He is also the kind of customer whose behavior we tacitly endorse by allowing our crew to create an in-group and an out-group in our premium cabins. She detailed his loud phone calls, his sneering remarks, his open amusement at her humiliation. He felt comfortable behaving this way because the environment curated by our employee validated his prejudice. We made him feel powerful, and he used that power to denigrate another passenger. In doing so, he created a hostile environment. Is that part of the excellence in air experience? Robert shook his head mutely. Phoenix Vanguard, Capital Serene, said her voice, dropping to an even more dangerous quiet tone, has a diverse portfolio. We own dozens of companies across multiple sectors. One of them is a green technology firm called Viridian Dynamics. As it happens, Viridian was in the final stages of negotiating a $40 million, 5-year enterprise software license with a company called Syntech Solutions. A collective gasp, though faint, was audible in the room. Gerard Depuy's eyes widened. Was Serene repeated, letting the word sink in. After my flight, I had my team review the deal. I found the terms unfavorable, and the attitude of their lead negotiator, Mr. Holloway, to be incompatible with Viridian's corporate values of partnership and respect. I personally vetoed the deal yesterday morning. Syntec Solutions was informed that we were pursuing other options. The room was utterly silent. This was no longer about a rude flight attendant. This was a display of raw, interconnected power. She had reached out from the airline and crushed a man's career not out of simple revenge, but as a business decision, an extension of the same principle. I imagine Mr. Holloway's performance review at Syntec will be as unpleasant as Ms. Miller's at AuraJet, she said coolly. That is what happens when you mistake arrogance for status. That is hard karma. She then leaned forward, her gaze sweeping across every single person at the table. So here is what is going to happen now. This is not a negotiation. First, Dahlia Miller's termination will be immediate. Furthermore, the head of in-flight services for the JFK hub and her direct supervisor are to be demoted. Their failure of oversight allowed this to fester. Second, Robert, she said, locking eyes with the terrified CEO. You will personally oversee the design and implementation of a new mandatory training program for all 20,000 of our cabin crew members. It will not be one of these useless, check-the-box sensitivity seminars. You will engage the top consulting firm in the DEI space. I recommend the Wharton Group, and I have already spoken to them to build a program based on immersive, real-world scenarios. I will personally review and approve the curriculum. We will call it the Whitaker Initiative. Your bonus, and indeed your tenure as CEO, will be directly tied to its successful implementation and the measurable improvement in our customer satisfaction scores among minority demographics. Robert Maxwell looked like he had been punched in the gut, but he nodded. Yes, Doctor. Of course. Third, she continued, we are going to change our VVIP-1 Alpha protocol. From now on, it will be used to conduct regular, anonymous dignity audits on our flights. Members of my team and of this board will fly in track suits, in jeans, in religious attire, in whatever they choose. They will report back on whether they were served with a plastic cup or a crystal flute. We will gather data on the unconscious bias that is costing us a fortune in silent churn. This is not about making people feel bad. This is about protecting our investment. It is about making AuraJet the airline it claims to be. A place of true excellence, not just for the Brent Holloways of the world, but for everyone who pays the price of admission. Are there any questions? There were none. The silence was absolute, filled only with the hum of the air conditioning and the shattered confidence of the executives. Dr. Serene Whitaker had not raised her voice. She had not yelled or cursed. She had simply calmly and methodically dissected their company, exposed its failings, and laid out the precise, brutal, and necessary steps for its salvation. She had wielded her power, not like a sledgehammer, but like a scalpel, cutting out the cancer with surgical precision. She stood up, her folder now closed. The board meeting is adjourned, she said, though it was Robert's line. I expect the first draft of the initiative's framework on my desk by Friday. She turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. She had been laughed at in business class, and in response, she had just taken control of the entire airline. The ripples of that boardroom confrontation spread outwards, swift and merciless, altering lives with the unfeeling force of gravity. For Dr. Serene Whitaker, it was a necessary, albeit unpleasant, day at the office. For Dahlia Miller and Brent Holloway, it was the beginning of a freefall. The unraveling of Dahlia Miller. Dahlia Miller received the call from HR an hour after the board meeting adjourned. It was short and brutally professional. Her employment with Aurajet was terminated effective immediately. Her 19 years of service were reduced to a line item in a ledger of corporate liability. Security would escort her to her locker to collect her personal belongings. Her final paycheck would be mailed. The first week was a blur of disbelief and indignation. She told her husband, a retired plumber named Gary, that she'd been fired by some vindictive rich woman on a power trip. She complained to her friends that the world had gone too sensitive, that you couldn't even look at someone the wrong way anymore without getting fired. In her version of the story, she was the victim, a hard-working woman cast aside by corporate politics. Then reality began to set in. She applied for a cabin crew position at Delta. No call back. She applied at United. Silence. She applied at American. An automated rejection email arrived 2 days later. She tried the international carriers, British Airways, Lufthansa, Emirates. Nothing. She didn't know that Dr. Whittaker's action had sent a shock-wave through the industry. The story of the VVIP-1 Alpha investor and the disastrous Flight AJ-112 had become a hushed cautionary tale among airline executives. While no one explicitly said Dahlia Miller was blacklisted, her name associated with such a high-profile culture failure was now toxic. No premium airline wanted to risk hiring the flight attendant who cost her CEO his bonus and his dignity. After 3 months of rejections, desperation led her to the budget carriers. An interview with Spirit Airlines went poorly. The interviewer asked her, "Describe a time you went above and beyond for a passenger, regardless of their appearance or status." The question felt so pointed, so specific, that she stammered, offering a weak, generic answer. She didn't get the job. Her world began to shrink. The pride she had taken in her job, the small measure of status it gave her in her suburban neighborhood, was gone. She was just an unemployed 49-year-old woman with a mortgage to pay. She saw Aurajet commercials on television, new ones featuring a diverse cast of passengers, and a tagline that spoke of a welcome for the world. It felt like a personal mockery. One afternoon, sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by bills, the weight of her actions finally crashed through the wall of her self-pity. It wasn't about the tracksuit. It wasn't about being too sensitive. She had judged a human being on sight. She had wielded her minuscule power to make someone feel small, and in a karmic twist of staggering proportions, that person had turned out to hold an immense, world-altering power of her own. She had been given a simple test of character, and she had failed it spectacularly. The plastic cup hadn't just been an insult. It had been a mirror, and now she couldn't stand the reflection. Her career was over. The life she had known was over. All because she had decided in a single moment of petty prejudice that a black woman didn't belong. The humiliation of Brent Holloway. Brent Holloway left the Aurajet flight feeling confused and vaguely uneasy. When he got to his hotel in Paris, he fired off an angry email to Aurajet's Platinum Medallion customer service, complaining about the unprofessional delay caused by the VVIP passenger. He never received a reply. The real trouble started 4 days later. He was in a meeting at Syntec Solutions' London office when his CEO, a hard-nosed man named Frank Peterson, called him. The line was staticky. "Brent, get back to New York. Now. Frank, what's going on? I'm about to close the Callaway deal. Forget Callaway. The Viridian Dynamics deal is dead. They pulled it. Get on the next plane." The line went dead. Brent was stunned. The Viridian deal was his masterpiece, the $40 million jewel that was going to guarantee him a 7-figure bonus and a promotion to the executive board. He scrambled, calling his contacts at Viridian. None of them picked up. He left frantic voicemails. They went unreturned. When he walked into Frank Peterson's office in New York 2 days later, The CEO didn't ask him to sit down. He tossed a printed email onto the desk. It was a single, devastating sentence from Viridian's COO. "Frank, we are terminating negotiations. We have decided to pursue a partnership with a company whose leadership culture is more closely aligned with Viridian's core values of mutual respect and professionalism." "What the hell did you do?" Brent Frank demanded, his face purple with rage. "Me, I didn't do anything. I've been whining and dining these guys for 6 months. They said leadership culture." Frank seethed. "That means you. Did you say something? Do something? Offend someone?" Brent's mind raced. He replayed every meeting, every dinner. It made no sense. And then a cold, sickening image surfaced in his memory. The quiet, unimpressed face of the black woman in the tracksuit from his flight. The way the executives had flocked to her. The way she had been escorted off the plane. Dr. Whittaker. A quick search on his phone confirmed his worst fears. Dr. Serene Whittaker. Founder, Phoenix Vanguard Capital. A titan of industry. And the search results revealed her firm, Phoenix Vanguard, had acquired Viridian Dynamics 2 months ago. The blood drained from his face. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What is it?" Frank barked. Brent couldn't bring himself to say it. He couldn't admit that his schoolyard taunts on an airplane had just vaporized a $40 million contract. He mumbled something about a misunderstanding. But Frank Peterson was no fool. He had his own sources. He found out. 2 days later, Brent Holloway was summoned back to the CEO's office. "You're a liability," Brent Frank said, his voice cold as ice. "You let your ego write a check this company couldn't cash. You didn't just lose a deal, you embarrassed us. You made Syntex Solutions look like a company run by arrogant, prejudiced fools. We're firing you, for cause." His fall was as swift as it was brutal. The company car was repossessed. The corporate cards were cancelled. Word of the spectacular implosion of the Viridian deal and the reason for it spread like wildfire through the tight-knit world of enterprise software sales. No one wanted to hire the hotshot salesman who had insulted a billionaire investor. His arrogance, once seen as a sign of a killer instinct, was now seen for what it was, a fatal character flaw. He had to sell his sprawling house in Connecticut. His wife, accustomed to a life of luxury, left him. He ended up in a small apartment in Queens, a bitter, diminished man haunted by a single catastrophic lapse in judgment. Occasionally, he would see Dr. Serene Whittaker on the cover of Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, lauded for her business acumen and her philanthropic work with the Whittaker Initiative, which had become a celebrated model for corporate training. Each time it was like a fresh twist of the knife. He had laughed at her, thinking he was on top of the world. Now she was on the cover of it, and he was staring at the ceiling of his cheap apartment, the echo of his own condescending laughter, a permanent ghost in his ears. A year can be an eternity, or the blink of an eye. In the life of a corporation, it is the span of a single crucial reporting cycle. 1 year after the infamous Flight AJ-112, the 54th floor boardroom at Aurajet headquarters was physically the same, yet spiritually unrecognizable. The suffocating fear that had once clung to the air like a toxic gas had been scrubbed clean, replaced by the bright, clean atmosphere of earned progress. The mahogany table still reflected the faces of the executives, but today those faces were not grim masks of anxiety. They were focused, engaged, and carried the quiet confidence of a team that had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. At the head of that table, Robert Maxwell stood with a posture that was subtly yet profoundly different. The slick, over-polished veneer of the career CEO had been stripped away, leaving behind a man who seemed more grounded, more substantial. The ordeal had aged him, etching new lines around his eyes, but it had also forged a new kind of authority in him, one born not from a title but from having stared into the abyss of his company's failure and clawing his way back. Dr. Serene Whittaker sat in her customary seat, a silent, powerful presence. Her gaze was as analytical as ever, but the icy edge had thawed, replaced by an intense, watchful focus. Before her was the quarterly report, but her real measure of success was the man speaking and the room listening. A year ago, Robert began his voice, steady and devoid of its former salesmanship. This board convened to face a moment of existential crisis. Not a financial crisis, but a moral one. A crisis of culture. We were confronted with the undeniable proof that our brand promise, excellence in air, had become a lie. Dr. Whittaker held up a mirror to us, and the reflection was unacceptable. He paused, letting the weight of that memory settle in the room. There was no shuffling of papers, no nervous coughs. There was only shared, sober recollection. Today I'm here to report on the work that has been done to shatter that mirror and build a new reality in its place. He clicked a remote, and the main screen lit up with a graph, showing a steep upward trajectory. As you can see, our global Net Promoter Score is up 12 points year over year, a solid achievement. But this is the number I want you to focus on. He zoomed in on a subset of the data. Satisfaction scores among passengers who identify as racial or ethnic minorities have risen by 34%. This isn't just a metric. This is a sea change. This is the direct result of the Whittaker Initiative. He moved to the next slide, which detailed the program. Phase 1 was about triage, implementing the new training, establishing the baseline. Phase 2, which we launched last quarter, is about embedding these values into our corporate DNA. We've established a mentorship program where our highest-scoring cabin crew members become dignity ambassadors, coaching their peers. The dignity audits have been revolutionary. We've had executives, myself included, fly incognito on over 200 flights. I've flown long-haul economy in a hoodie and sneakers. Our head of marketing flew to London wearing a hijab. The data we've gathered has allowed us to reward genuine excellence and surgically address remaining pockets of the old broken culture. While he spoke, Serene's mind drifted back to the cold fury she had felt in this very room, the necessary ruthlessness of her decisions. Dahlia Miller's career had been obliterated. Brent Holloway's life had been dismantled. She felt no regret. Consequences were a non-negotiable part of her worldview, but she acknowledged the human cost. Their downfall had been the steep price of entry for the progress she was now witnessing. It had not been an act of vengeance, which is a fleeting, hot emotion. It had been a correction, a cold, calculated rebalancing of an unjust equation. The well-being of thousands of employees and millions of passengers had depended on it, the most powerful tool in this transformation. However, Robert was saying a new, almost reverential tone in his voice isn't in a binder or a seminar. It's on display at our primary training academy in Atlanta. An image appeared on the screen. It was a simple, clear plastic cup spotlit and enclosed in a museum-quality glass case. Below it, a small brass plaque was affixed to the pedestal. Robert read the inscription aloud. "The $1 Million Cup." We teach every new hire its story. We tell them how this 3-cent object nearly cost the company millions in market value and brand reputation. We teach them that it represents a single, thoughtless moment of disrespect, and that it is their primary job to ensure no passenger ever feels the way the recipient of this cup felt. It has become a legend within the company, a powerful, humbling lesson that the smallest actions carry the greatest weight. A quiet murmur of approval went through the room. Serene looked at the image of the cup. She had transformed an instrument of her own humiliation into an enduring symbol of the company's highest values. It was a masterful stroke of power, not just to command, but to create meaning. This was the return on investment that truly mattered. She offered Robert a slow, deliberate nod of approval. It was all the validation he needed. Weeks later, Serene found herself preparing for a flight from Paris to San Francisco. It was a trip she made often, but this one felt different. She was in the Aurajet flagship lounge at Charles de Gaulle, a space that had been redesigned with warmer tones and more inclusive art. She watched the staff interact with the guests. There was an attentiveness, a warmth that hadn't been there before. It was subtle, but it was unmistakable. Boarding her flight, she found her way to her seat. The seat had become a silent touchstone, for her a personal vantage point from which to measure the world. She settled in her attire the same as always, for long-haul travel, comfortable, understated, anonymous. As the last of the business-class passengers found their seats, a young flight attendant approached her. She was a black woman, likely in her mid-20s, with bright, intelligent eyes and a calm, professional poise. Instead of standing over Serene, the attendant knelt slightly, a graceful maneuver that brought them to eye level. It was a technique from the initiative, designed to dismantle the implicit hierarchy between crew and passenger and foster a sense of direct, personal connection. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," the flight attendant said, and her smile wasn't a corporate mandate. It was a beam of genuine warmth. "My name is Maria. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Can I get you some champagne, or perhaps some sparkling water, to start your journey?" Serene looked at this young woman and saw more than just an employee. She saw the embodiment of the change she had forced into existence. She saw a professional who was confident and secure in her position, who treated the passenger in the simple tracksuit with the same deference she would offer to someone in a tailored suit. She saw the future, and it was working. A wave of profound, quiet validation washed over Serene, so potent it was almost emotional. This was the real dividend. Sparkling water would be lovely. "Maria." Serene replied, her voice softer than usual. "Thank you." "My pleasure," Maria said, before moving on to the next passenger with the same effortless grace. Moments later, the water arrived. It was presented in a heavy, brilliant crystal flute, cool to the touch with a delicate condensation beading on its sides. Serene took it, her fingers wrapping around the solid, reassuring weight of the glass. She held it for a moment, the memory of the flimsy plastic cup, a distant, almost surreal echo. She took a slow sip. The cold, crisp effervescence felt like victory. Not a gloating victory over a defeated flight attendant or a ruined salesman. It was a deeper, more resonant triumph. It was the victory of a principle. In this small, perfect moment, the respectful greeting, the courteous service, the crystal glass, an idea had been made real. That dignity is not a privilege to be earned by status or appearance, but a fundamental right to be afforded to all. And she, Dr. Serene Whitaker, had wielded her power to bend the arc of a corporate universe toward that simple, unshakable truth. What we just witnessed wasn't a fairy tale. It was a story about the unyielding law of consequences. It's a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, the way we treat people has ripples we can't even imagine. Dahlia Miller and Brent Holloway weren't just rude. They were architects of their own downfall, building their ruin one condescending word at a time. Dr. Serene Whitaker didn't just seek revenge. She demanded a reckoning and used her power to enforce systemic change, proving that true power isn't just in having a seat at the table, but in redesigning the table itself. What are your thoughts on this story of hard karma? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's prejudice came back to haunt them in a spectacular way? Share your stories and reflections in the comments below. If you found this story as satisfying as we did, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more true life stories of drama and consequence.